Welcome to today's episode of Creative Dynamos. Today I'm talking from my friend Tim Niederriter. Tim and I have been friends for quite a while, and I've been a big fan of his writing for almost that long. Tim, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm all right. It's a little. I assume you're still out east, so it's still morning here, and I'm having a good. Oh, sorry, shouldn't time lock the podcast. This is how little I. This is how much having a month off of interview shows or whatever has I ended my podcast a little while ago. Has This is what it's done to me, right? And I've forgotten how to do a podcast, but no, I'm doing all right. I've started some new projects lately. I'm very excited about my new method of writing, so hopefully we can get into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are easily one of the most prolific writers I know. I was looking at your Amazon page earlier when I was making my little background here, and I was blown away. Like, I knew you had been writing a lot, but I don't think I understood exactly how much you've been putting out. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about your writing process and your output.
Oh yeah. So I don't know what was the last book you thought I'd written before you check this out, because I haven't written a novel actually in like 5 years, 6 years almost.
So I know the last I had looked at your stuff, it was probably maybe the first Iron Dragon.
Oh, okay,
Um,
okay, yeah. That's novellas. So that's the thing. That's the secret to having a lot of titles out, is publish a lot of novellas.
sure.
But also so just make them shorter, right? Iron Dragons, it's 5 novellas, and I really like that series, but it didn't really take off. So I gave it a shake, though. I gave it a fair shake, and now I say I haven't written novels in between starting that series and finishing it, but really what I haven't done is published any novels, pretty much, except for maybe a few of the Iron Dragon books are almost novels, or they're short novels, depending on your measurements, right? They're like around 50,000 words.
You know,
But
I don't like to get hung up on, like, these days, especially, like, novels,
mhm.
novellas, like, when you're in the world that we're in now, where so much of our readers are reading stuff electronically, who cares?
Yeah, they're books. I have published a bunch of books, that's for sure.
There you go.
And it's funny because and though the most recent one on the website, the one at the top of the page on the website, is a placeholder cover for the book I'm working on right now, which is going to be a longer novel, an epic fantasy. So like that's been a big involved process for the past year or so, predominantly because I missed the pre-order deadline. So I put it on the back burner because I'm
Mhm.
like, I don't want to release an epic fantasy that's 150,000 plus words long without a pre-order.
Yeah, that makes
That
sense.
just felt like it felt wrong to do that, even if it's not a long pre-order, right? So I was like, I missed the pre-order. I'm like, okay, so I don't have pre-order privileges for a year, so I put it on the back burner till I got them back. Um,
I didn't realize that happens.
oh, that's Amazon for you. Yeah, it's happened to me 2 or 3 times actually. Because you can move the pre-order deadline, right? You can move it, but only about a week. And if you do it or 2 weeks, and if you do it more than once, you automatically lose your pre-order privileges for a year and a day, basically, like an old fairy tale, seemingly. No, but as far as writing, writing speed and stuff, I don't feel like I'm as quick as I used to be. But hey, whatever. I've been focusing more on quality, which is good.
Yeah.
At least, though, I guess my writing. It sounds silly to say that because I did release a book that was pretty unedited recently, which is Waterskin, right at the start of the summer. That's my most recent novel book. I've released some short stories as well, and those were better received because they received good editing first.
Sure.
But I had a bet to get Waterskin released by a certain date, and for some reason, publishing the book was a quality book was less important to me than winning this bet, because my priorities got really messed up. So I'm editing Waterskin now to re-release.
I hear you.
But I did so yeah, people shouldn't buy that book right now, is the bottom line. Even though the hardcover is very pretty, and Amazon does good hardcovers these days if you're buying from them.
Mhm.
That was one of my big takeaways. Like, I want books that can release in hardcover, because they actually make a really good case laminate now on
Mhm.
Amazon for print on demand. Anyway, that's beside the point. I feel like I'm filibustering, but really what it is I'm just not used to talking in a focused way lately. I have recently moved from, I've spanned the gamut, I guess, of different writing processes using technology. I used to write, I learned to write by typing on a keyboard, right? Like so many people did, at least in my generation, right? I'm a millennial. So always had a word processor, available to me, unlike some older people. And I really got used to typing on the word processor. I love that. I typed my first million words or so. And then, or actually more than that, I recently did a word count for my published works, or my finished rough drafts and beyond. Anything that got to that stage or later, and it was about 4 million words, 3 or 4 million. So I did most of those, but I did about half of those with dictation, which is the next step, right? When I was in my late 20s, I started dictating, and now and for about 3 or 4 years, that's basically all I did. But it made very sloppy drafts, so it took forever to fix them. So I moved gradually back to typing, and we're in a kind of combination of the two. And now I'm actually, because of my job doesn't allow me to have a computer, but I can have my phone around all the time. I've started typing on my phone a lot. I type into mobile documents on my phone, and I've been doing not that many words, but a lot of different projects at a time, just to keep myself entertained while at work, because there's a lot of downtime. So my goal was like a page a day, like 300 words a day, in a couple different stories while I'm at work. And then when I'm on a day off like this, I can spend more time on the main project. So I'm trying to write like 1,800 words a day in the Mirror Throne, which is the current epic fantasy, which is ancient Egypt meets feudal Japan is kind of the fantasy setting. I think it's really exciting. I'm really happy with it. And there's of course magic thrown in there and weird creatures of the kind that I always make, except with fewer hands. As the people in my game group would tell you, I'm a fan of monsters with too many hands, or the wrong kind of hands, human hands usually.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, that it's interesting that you're talking about writing on your phone. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I want to try is, so I've got a Samsung Fold, and it's got a pretty big screen. It's like a mini tablet, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I was cleaning, where is it? I was cleaning out my office because not cleaning out. I was like basically
Reorganizing, right? Yeah.
organizing my office because I moved my office from upstairs to what I'm calling the dungeon, and I ran across this
Mm.
Bluetooth keyboard, and what I am slowly putting together is kind of a mobile office,
Ah.
like a creative office, not necessarily office for my work because I've got my work laptop and stuff. But what I'd like to
Right.
try doing is see how it is to write on my phone, either with the keyboard that's on screen or with that Bluetooth keyboard, and just
Mm.
see if that's better, less distraction prone, because ultimately it's about me trying to find a way to write in a way that reduces distractions. I can't I can't I'm not going to handwrite. Like I could move to like a pen and paper kind of thing, but then
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to transcribe back into like a word processor or something. But that's just not going to happen.
too
Uh,
much technology. You can't go back that far. Yeah.
Yeah, my plus my handwriting is abysmal, but I like the idea of using like my smartphone, which is a powerful computer in its own right, as a writing device, maybe a lower distraction type writing device. So yeah, so how is that working out for you? Are you managing to like meet your word count goal of a page or two a day while working on your smartphone?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've been doing that pretty regularly. Granted, my distraction period, I've only started recently though, over the last couple weeks. I started writing on my phone because I realized like I can do all sorts of stuff on this phone. It's quite, it's a decent whatever Galaxy's phone, not a new one, but it's good enough. And I realized I have gotten pretty good at typing because I do a lot of texting when I'm at work too, because like there's so much downtime. I'm not going to tell you what my job is, but there's a lot of time where I'm basically just there to watch over stuff. So I have time to type and just wait for the next thing that I need to do. And I am like, I've been texting and posting a lot relative for me anyway. I don't post that much, but I've been texting friends and posting a fair amount at work. I'm like, let's just change that and try to do some fiction. And I found it really refreshing because it's not the distractions so much that are the problem for me when I'm in this context. I mean, they are a problem for me when I'm typing on a laptop, which is my previous preferred method and still my preferred method overall for faster writing, because it's very slow to type on a phone screen, which is what I'm limited to. I can't use peripherals either, because the point is to have a low profile use of the phone.
Sure.
And so I'm not for various reasons. But it's not like stealth so much as I just don't want people to think I'm setting up a base kind of thing in my location. It doesn't, I can't be too obvious about it. And so the laptop was not an option. And so, but typing on the phone is so slow that I'm like, I just need to be patient. And it really has helped me. I'm not sure if it's increasing the amount I get out, actually, because I barely type. Like I said, I type 300 words in like 2 or 3 different stories each day. And that's a lot. 1,000 words, 900 words at work. That's a good deal. I'll take it. And but it takes like an hour, total typing time, which is very slow for me. My keyboard pace is like 1,800 words an hour, so it's like half speed.
Yeah, you and I type about the same.
Most, yeah, and that's on a good day actually. So lately, can you hear the dog barking? Never mind. So the overall take on this is that it's slowing down is actually a good thing in its own right, and I'm not just writing on the phone because it keeps me consistent. Actually, that's the main reason I started doing it, right? So I wanted to write more often, but it also is nice because it means I can take more time on the scenes. And I've noticed that there's a real element of not taking enough time that has snuck into my work since I started dictating. And when I dictated, I would dictate, 6,000 words in an hour or more. And that was one of the reasons the drafts came out so sloppy, but also I would forget what I actually put in the book, which is kind of nice, but also kind of bad, when you're actually editing it.
I can see that.
It doesn't work out as a craft part, and I'm not as conscious of what I'm doing, right? And that's one of the reasons it works, but it's also one of the reasons I don't like it as much as far as enjoying the actual act of creating stuff, because it doesn't feel I'm doing anything. I'm just flowing out bullshit. Sorry, this is that's basically what I'm doing when I dictate. And so when I type, the slower I type, it's kind of ironic, is the more thought that goes into it to some extent.
See that?
Yeah, and so like, I mean, granted, 2,000 words or so an hour at most when I'm typing, or 1,200 to 2,000. It's kind of my range of typing speed when I'm on a keyboard. Is that some people would say that's very fast. I think it's fast enough, but it doesn't feel super fast to me anymore. Obviously, I mean, having dictated 3 to 5 times that much in hours before without a stop is a different. It just puts things in perspective, right? Some people say you can't. Actually, recently there was a recent Dead Robot Society podcast where they talked about how that you run out of speed, you run out of steam because you use it all. It's an issue that some people have, and for me, that's about after 12,000 words in a day. I'm done, and I probably won't write the next day either, kind of thing. Like, that's unless I'm really, really trying. So that's when dictation is like, doing 2 hours of dictation is way too much, and it will burn me out very quickly. I'm granted, I have done 5 days back to back a couple times, but it's whatever. It's not easy. It doesn't work unless you really know where your story is going, or you have a really strong inspiration for it, which is I did at the time. And so slowing down is like, I'm not actually losing words. I'm trying to look at it that way. It's because words per day is more important than words per minute or words per hour, in my opinion. At least if you have all the time in the world, which I actually do.
Yeah.
I don't, at this point, I'm like, I don't have a lot of responsibilities, and even my job, even at work, I don't have to be on most of the time. So spending time doing important stuff I have time, and what I need to do is make sure I can use it. And that's important. And so if I burn out on writing and I'm sitting around for 3 days without doing any writing, that's going to make me feel bad.
Yes. I think people lose sight of, if you can do 500 words, 1,000 words a day consistently every day, or five days a week, whatever, versus 2,000 words a day, but it's hit and miss.
Yeah.
It's gonna add up. It's gonna add up over the long term. I
Yeah.
I struggle with that consistency. Like when I write, I can really bang some words out, but it's that getting in front of the typewriter, get typewriter, ooh, listen to me, getting in front of the keyboard.
Someone didn't start with the word processor.
Ironically, I've never written on a typewriter. Well,
Oh, okay.
I say never. In college, I think I wrote one or two papers on a typewriter. But it's if I get in front of my keyboard and work, if I tell myself I'm going to write for 10 minutes and then just see what happens,
Hmm.
I'll definitely write for at least 10 minutes and usually much longer than that. So the key is just pulling up that whatever project I want to work on and working on it
Yeah.
consistently. Uh,
Exactly. I mean, I've had a little bit of mission creep, I guess you might say, on my daily writing on the phone because I'm like, oh, I could do 2 stories a day. And I'm like, yeah, that works. 2 is pretty doable. I can do 300 words in 2 different stories. I'm like, but can I do 3? And I'm like, I'm trying to do 300 word chunks a day. And then tried to add a 4th one yesterday. And I'm like, I think I need to reduce the word count a little bit on some of these. I'm going to try to write over 1,000 words in a day. That seems like a lot when I'm nominally working on
right.
something else,
Well, plus,
so I don't mind changing the goal slightly, but even 100 words in a story, that's something. That's not nothing. Is
yeah,
my point. Yeah, especially if
like
I'm doing 5 stories a day or whatever. If like my insane overshoot has been. So I think I'm going to temper my expectations there. Right. I've got to, and also the point is just to keep things going, keep inspired, and get used to starting. I think that's actually the most important part because, ironically, I think a lot of authors, I'm definitely one of them. One of the best things we can do is start a book because you get so much practice starting stories.
hmm
Once you've done a lot of stories, well, most people start at the beginning, at least in some way or other, and because every story is a beginning, but not every story is an ending when you're creating them, right? In some sense, some people do write from the back, but I think that's rarer. So usually, like I'll write my story in order, right? And the thing is, that means I got pretty good at writing openings compared to endings. And I think it's the opposite though with actually writing sessions though. I'm so bad at starting a writing session, or at least I was for a long time. I was like starting the writing session is the hard part, so I just need to keep going. And then I started running into trouble with consistency of how long I can go writing. And that was a real problem. I mean, honestly, I feel like I've been running into so many obstacles as to actual craft process or process of production that I don't know. I don't feel like I have most of them anymore, which is really nice. I guess I tackled most of them. I front loaded the challenges. I don't know.
Well, and I think that's part of growing as a writer. I tell people, I often ask the question, what are some routines you have? And I think the fewer routines you have in terms of I got to be listening to the right music, or I've got to be,
Mm.
sitting in the right space, or I've got, I always do this, or I always do that. The fewer routines you have, as long as the writing itself is the routine, the fewer sort of support structures you have in terms of what you have to be listening to or whatever, the better. Like I can write in if there's music or not music, if the TV's on or it's not on, if somebody's in the room with me or not. I've kind of trained my brain to be able to kind of tune out what's going on around
Hmm.
me. I don't have to be in a particular place or time or headspace. I just have to. The hard part for me is just opening up the document and diving into it. So, uh,
Yeah, yeah. So you don't need vodka and cornflakes, is what I'm hearing here.
yes,
That's good.
yes.
I
So,
actually think I kind of have the opposite issue. Is like I can't really write at home anymore. I have a really hard time writing in my own house because various reasons, but we don't have to explore them. But basically, I don't feel that comfortable when I'm here, and so I don't write much at home. I go to a coffee shop, and then but otherwise, I really do think you've got a better way of it where it doesn't matter if it didn't matter to me at all where I was writing. That'd be really nice. I think that'd be fantastic. And I'm more, but as it is, I'm only used to writing outside of the house, but I can pretty much do it wherever at that point.
now I am, having said that, like I am in the process of, now that I'm redoing my office and have moved it into a different room
Mm,
of the house, it is my space. Previously, I shared my office space with my wife, and it was a smaller room, and this is a much larger room. I'm going to have room to segment it up into a place to write, a place to record once I get everything sort of hashed out. So I think it will be nice to have a place to go and write in a dedicated writing space, even though I don't necessarily need that. I did notice, like, I came down here last week, and
Hmm.
again, it was one of those. I'm going to come down. I don't feel great, but I'm going to like just come down here and I'm going to bang out 10 minutes. And the inspiration struck, and I just wrote 1,500 words, and
Nice.
it was like no resistance, and there was no distraction. There was no, it was so having that dedicated space is a
Hmm.
good option to have. And so whether I need it or not, it's going to be nice to have it in the tool bag, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I don't know. I forgot. I already forgot the name of your show. My bad. If because if we're talking predominantly about process, that's one thing. But there's so much else that goes into it. I've been trying very hard lately to think less about the writing process, to be honest, and just go with it. Because for many years, I mean, I was an English major in college, and I've kind of studied academically an approach to writing that is very focused. That was very focused on process for many years. And lately, I try to just eschew it and focus on the stories themselves and make them more. And I find that really helps as well with the inspiration side of things. That's what you kind of reminded me of here, even though it's a bit of a tangent. Because as much as I like talking about writing, I have talked about writing a lot. There's a reason I've ended a live after reading my old podcast where I talk to writers. Just recently, I ended that show because I'm like, it's not that I'm not interested in talking to writers anymore, but I don't need to. I feel, and it's not that I don't have things to learn, but I feel like I've learned what I can from interviewing and casually chatting with people and stuff
Mhm.
as far as personal. So personally, it doesn't interest me the way it used to. And also, I heard a lot of the same stories, right? It's interesting, and not the sort of stories these people wrote are probably all different, but their stories of how they become writers is very similar in a lot of cases. Or there's a few different main, like, it's like Mad Libs almost, right? I had this kind of this and that kind of this and so on. And this category of thing, like I write by myself or I write with a collaborator, that kind of stuff. It bubbles down. It boils down to there's a few variables that are different but there's only a few options. There's a menu, you might say.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so I guess I'm just saying that for that reason, I've become a little less interested in talking about writing process, but I still love it. Obviously, it's my main thing. Yeah. Uh,
and let's talk about inspiration. Let's talk
mhm.
about that, because one of the things that, and this is Creative Dynamos, one of the things that I want to do with this is talk to not just writers, but I've invited my first musician on here, and I'm going to be talking to a visual artist on here early next year. It's
Cool.
I want to talk about what makes your writing meaningful, and I have with other writers that I've had on
Hmm.
here. What makes your writing meaningful to you as a person? What's your
Mm.
creative process, not just your writing process?
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
you one of the things that where you and I are very similar is you write in multiple genres, and you write. So I noticed a book of poetry.
Yes. Yes. I
Um,
have a little poetry out there. Yeah.
so this I didn't know about you, that you write some poetry. So what's that all about?
Well, I've been writing poetry almost as long as I've been writing fiction. I just can't, well, actually, not really. 5 years, it doesn't feel like as long of a time anymore. But I started writing poetry, I guess, in high school. So not that long after I started writing novels. But I guess I really enjoy the technical side of writing poetry, specifically the syntax or diction. Choosing words is really important in poetry, especially, and what you omit is really important. And so the
Mhm.
literal meanings to me, because I'm autistic, and the literal meaning of word is very intriguing to me a lot of the time, because I take things literally a lot when I shouldn't. Right? People make a joke based on a pun or something, and I'm like, oh no, I know what you meant. I just don't care. Is kind of the vibe. I'm studied enough in English and puns and stuff. I understand a pun. I just I don't know, it just doesn't do it for me most of the time. At least when I hear it out loud. But I do enjoy a good like double entendre kind of thing in some sense, like or even the single entendre of like making something ultra specific is what I think of that as.
Uh-huh.
Even though I think that's a reference to the Back to the Future, master single entendre. Anyway, um, but so I do approach a lot from and that's partially because I've been a writing nerd for so long, right? I would approach it as like I want to use this technique, and what does this technique lend itself to? What kind of story will that create? But I also remember, I mean, I've always been inspired by the games I've played, not video games so much. I like video games, but I don't play that many of them compared to tabletop games. And I got into tabletop games about the same time, and I have a game as I got into I was actually 6, so it was way before I started writing. So I started playing games like Warhammer in my early years, and D&D and things like that. And I really am inspired by honestly the stuff that comes from that inspired them. Elric of Melniboné by Michael Moorcock. That series has really resonated with me, and it was a huge inspiration for, especially some specific parts of almost total ripoff parts of Warhammer Fantasy. That world is like, oh, this guy is this is a setting that's basically just the place Elric comes from. But it's like, then that's where the hero comes from. The hero comes from in the Elric of Melniboné. Comes from this, the island is like very similar to the Elven islands from Warhammer, and it just but there's a lot of other options, and I love recombination though as the kind of source of creativity. And yet I say that, but I also do believe originality exists, and I think that's kind of unusual for me as a creative person. I think most creatives will say, we'll go with the old wisdom of Solomon. There's nothing new under the sun, or whatever, the ecclesiastical approach. And I don't fully agree with that, because I think you can make new things out of old things, I guess is what I believe. And I was, not to get too deep into the religion side, but I was raised Catholic, and in that, it was impressed upon me as a young kid at Catholic school that God can create, or in that theology, God creates, but humans can only make things. They only make stuff out of raw materials.
Uh-huh.
Whereas you cannot make new material. You can only use the material that's already there. So in that way, it's actually very physics oriented, right? It's conservation of ideas in some sense, right? You have to use what already exists to make your stuff. It doesn't just pop out of nowhere. And I still think that, and I think that's true, but there's a compromise when it comes to creativity, right? There's a compromise of, if you change it enough, it will seem completely different, and not just as an artificial piece. I mean, there's a particular story I wrote. Origin of Storms is my longest current book, and it takes place in the universe I came up with when I was a kid. And I mean, it's changed a lot since I was a kid, but the original concept was, it's Star Wars, but what's the unoriginal part about Star Wars? And this is what a 6-year-old autistic kid thinks about Star Wars. He thinks, well, that planet and star thing, they have those in Star Trek, they have those in whatever other shows and movies. Let's get rid of that whole system of how the universe works and replace it with something else. And that's what I did. So I have this pillar universe, which is very, very different, but it follows most of the same physical laws as our universe. But it's vastly different physically. It looks different. It doesn't follow the same laws. And I treated it like science fiction, right? Even though people have told me it's more like space fantasy in the vibe, and that's fine by me. I love space fantasy as well. But there's big old ships that fly around, but there's no void between stars. There's no dark matter. There's only empty air, basically, is like the most empty that the universe gets. And I think it's pretty fun. But my point is, I've never heard anyone else come up with anything quite like that, and I very rarely heard. And maybe it's hard, but I think the way you can make new stuff, or functionally make new stuff, as far as genre fiction, which is my main focus, is you got to reach farther than people are willing to go. I mean, that's at that point, the setting becomes a challenge to use, but it has something unique to it. There's a uniqueness that maybe also comes from the fact that I was a child that didn't have any concept of why I wanted it this way. I just wanted it to be different. And wanting to be different first is kind of the first step, I think. That was a long-winded way of saying being different, being original isn't everything. But if you want to be original, you might have to go further than you could imagine in some sense. And you will eventually imagine it. You've just got to keep working at it. That's my point.
I think that you're onto something there. I think that taking a trope and pushing it until it breaks, or at least bends, is definitely one way of uh, doing something original. And I think that, for example, I was talking with a fantasy author, Carolyn Atlantis. I did an interview with her, and it was a really great interview. One of the things that she has done is some fan fiction of Oz, which was great. That's not quote unquote original,
Right. It's
but
going the other direction of being more familiar. Yeah.
on the flip side of that, she's got a fantasy world that she's developed where she's doing some things that are very original in my way of thinking, in my experience, where she's got a setting that takes place in the Iron Age, which I think is
Mm,
fairly original because with a lot of fantasy, you tend to go into like a Renaissance or you go with like a medieval kind of setting, and then her fantasy races are essentially different species of human.
okay.
So it's more scientific than traditional fantasy in a lot of ways because there's a scientific basis for her fantasy races. They're elves, they're still called elves and dwarves and etc. But
Mm,
there's a reason, there's a grounding for why they're not humans, um,
right.
and for why they're called what they're called. And so
Yeah. No, I. Sorry, you were going somewhere with
And
that.
so I was just gonna say, and so she took the fantasy tropes and she like you did with your world, and she just pushed them further and or pushed them out wider uh,
Yeah. I
until she
actually
came
also
up
think that the
with
narrowness, I mean, sometimes selecting what you want, right? Like I think I can imagine a lot of the time people I've seen that done in some other settings and stuff where there's a Jerry, like in the Elder Scrolls video game series, there is throughout that series, it starts off because there's multiple races, but most of them are considered to be human or elf. And I think elves are like supposed to be a subset of humans, but there's like different kinds of people. But like the thing is, there's like the orcs in that setting, right? It's traditional fantasy races for in a lot of ways, but the orcs were considered to be not human for a long time. But that's a political division in that setting, and that alone is like, okay, look at that, that's a twist.
right?
Is that it's not about it being considered, and or like Vlad Taltos by Stephen Burroughs, that series. Humans, as we know them, are not called humans in that setting. We're called Easterners, and the elfy people, the big giant elfy people, are call themselves humans, but we would call them Targaryens because that's what whatever, that's where they're from. But it's just it's a gerrymandering of who is what. You're moving people around to determine what it's defining the existence of reality, and that honestly that is a big there's a defining reality is a huge part of fantasy specifically.
Well,
What's
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm in the process of writing my first high fantasy.
Oh, cool.
And I decided this, I took the setting from my own D&D world,
Hmm.
which I hadn't got to play around with that much. And one of the things I discovered while writing it, because it's fleshed out, but there's still, as we know as writers, it's never as fleshed out as we think it is.
That's right.
I discovered by the use of an epithet during the story that most of the sentient races think of this concept of these six races capitalized, six
Mm,
races, and that's your elves, your dwarves, your humans, halflings, etc. um, well, there are more than six sentient races.
mm,
And the reason why there are six races is in the mythology of the creation story. There are six major deities, and each one of those
oh,
deities is responsible for the creation of each of these six races. As in the current setting, like, for example, the halflings, which is actually a pejorative for the race
mm,
that they are, don't really think much of the mythology for the deity that supposedly
yeah.
made them, and the same is true for the shoot the gnomes. The gnomes were supposedly created by the trickster god, and the gnomes
Okay.
themselves are like, well, that seems kind of
That's a little bit bigoted now,
yeah.
don't you think? It sounds a little bit racist. Yeah.
So yeah, so it's stuff like that where I'm
Yeah.
sort of tackling there's a concept of mythology in this world and whether the gods exist or not and et cetera, whether there's there's any atheists in this fantasy world where gods are active more or less. Still there are people who are like, I kind of reject this creation idea, and I think that we came about in a different way.
Hmm.
And the main thrust of the story is they're solving this murder mystery, and they're not being able to use magic in the solving of this mystery because magic is waning.
Mm.
Um, and so they're having to use like traditional scientific methods.
Oh, that's cool.
I think taking those, I'm keeping the fantasy elements that I want to keep, and I'm putting fantasy elements that I think are kind of, I don't know, boring or overdone or whatever, or kind of cheating in some cases. And I'm putting them on the back burner, making them less important to this particular story. Not that magic is cheating. I mean, there's still going to be
No,
lots.
no, no. But I know what you mean, though, right? Sometimes it's too easy to
Right,
just
like
say like I can do this and that, or like in that book Waterskin I mentioned earlier. Like I was like, this is an urban fantasy. It takes place on Earth, but the main characters are all aliens, pretty much, that are from
okay.
other planets. But they're fantasy aliens, so like space wizards, you might say. But they're all visiting the Earth for various reasons. Like the beginning of that book was I lost my mother in December, and I guess that really did affect how I approached it because when I finally started writing books again, that Waterskin was my first full release. I think my first full length book I released. I mean, it's a short book, but you know what I mean. After my mother's passed, and it is basically about grief. It is about that kind of thing because, and I even changed the original. I had like some ideas I was kicking around, and I'm like, well, why do we want? I thought, okay, so we'll send these guys to Earth. My various characters, we'll send them to Earth so we can get an idea of who they are, and it actually resulted in a pretty high concept story because they ended up going for a funeral. They went to Earth because they're travelers. They travel all across the universe and through various magical methods. But they also have this thing going on where they will go to one of them, their fellow travelers. They'll go to wherever they are when they're about to die. So that was kind of that's kind of their custom as a nomadic culture almost. So they're all different species and stuff, but like so this guy who's dying is basically human. He's from the Earth. This is as close as you get to his home, and he's planned this whole mess up. And this is another example of like where you can be confused with being original, right? Because this guy is not the main character. He's on his deathbed in the first chapter, and the hero arrives. The hero and the other characters arrive to kind of see him off, but they've been tricked. And then there's a level of plot design that's interesting here too, because originally this concept was that there was going to be a golem type creature in the story. There was like going to be either the main character's best friend or his arch enemy, or maybe both eventually. Who knows? And as the series goes on, maybe it will develop into different and more combative fashion. As it is, they ended up being basically buddies. But the golem, I was like, I want him to be a flesh golem though, right? But where am I going to get a body for a flesh golem, right? I'm not going to find a Frankenstein body monster line around here, am I? Well, I have a dead body already. And so I was like, by the end of, and so by the end of chapter 3, we have this kind of reanimated character, but he was reanimated by the guy himself. The guy who died used his own magic to reanimate his own corpse as a new being. Like he got remade as a new creature, which makes sense in context, but is very difficult to explain. And people have called that kind of an original thing. So like it doesn't take much. Sometimes it's just a slightly different take. Like having magic that affects your own corpse after death.
Yeah,
People don't see that a lot.
yeah,
Just saying, like, who cares about that normally? But this guy did,
absolutely.
apparently. And all that is derived from various systems and stuff because this is a larger multiverse. And I know what happens to people when they die in this multiverse because I've written books about that. And so just weight of differences changes a lot, right? This guy who's this wizard whose body gets reanimated is one of the people who would know that. So I'm like, okay, I created a guy who can, he knows that he'll lose his magic if he lets it go with him to his afterlife. And he
Okay.
doesn't want that for various reasons. So he's like, I need to find a way to keep the magic on in this realm while my soul moves on. And that's exactly what happens. So it's kind of a twist, but it's not fully revealed yet. But it's like this thing is make this weird, like this weird middle ground, right? Where there's a gap between how much the reader is getting and how much I know, but also there's a lot of interest there already, kind of inherently. Because it's a subject that's just different from what people expect. You don't expect like, oh, your sidekick is going to be the guy. It's going to be the reanimated body of your dead buddy. Huh? Sounds weird.
it's that kind of it's that kind of creativity that I think readers want. And it's always interesting when you put something out there and you're thinking of it in one way, and then a reader comes along and they bring their own point of view to the story and they get things out of it that you're like, wow, I didn't think about that. So that's another layer to this whole thing. The
Right.
creativity doesn't stop when you finish the book. You know,
Yeah, that is the joy of writing for other people, right? And because I'll write something that just comes off as normal to me. Honestly, as kind of arrogant as that might sound, or humble braggy as that might sound, is like, well, that didn't seem that weird to me. And people are like, that is insane. That's how I got frequently. I've gotten in book reviews, right? Like, that is wild. That is a thing that people didn't think of, or most people wouldn't think of. And I think that can go for most creative people. Honestly, it's not just me. I'm not the most creative person in the world. I don't think I am anyway, but I am pretty creative. I just mean, like, there's other people who are more creative than me, right? But the thing is, it doesn't take a lot to do it. It's more, it's what you do with it that matters more than how much you have, right? If there indeed could be a measurement of how much creativity you
yeah,
have.
I don't think creativity is something you can really quantify. Like
No, no.
I was at a I guess a craft fair this weekend, and I had a table with my wife, and she's a photographer, and I was just struck, as I often am in these kind of situations where I'm surrounded by creative people, by how amazing it is that I've got this person over here who is a woodworker, and this person over here
Hmm.
who creates knives, and this person over here who's like a knitter and a jewelry maker, painter who also does fiber work, and
Hmm.
writers and paint. Just that, like you can't quantify um, creativity.
No,
And the lady that was next to us, who was a knitter, she's like, "Well, I'm a crafter," and I'm like, "No, ma'am, you are an artist. You may also be a crafter if you want to define craft as making something that has a function, like a basic function, like keeping somebody warm, but you're also an artist in the sense that you're working with color and you're making something that's beautiful. And that takes an artistic eye and an artistic soul to make something that's beautiful in addition to something that's functional. So I said, don't think of yourself as just a crafter. I mean, that's like, thinking of myself as a writer, like writing is art.
hmm
It's also a craft. Painting is art. It's also a craft. So I think that people think of crafting as being less than. Uh,
or less highbrow. Yeah, and honestly, I think that even the distinction between crafters and artists is kind of silly, because when I think of art, I think of stuff that helps you weather time. I mean, just because you're not wearing a coat, right? Just because somebody made a coat, and maybe one seems more practical because it keeps your body alive, which is necessary. For the other, it's just higher in some sense. It's higher. It's higher on the or lower on the hierarchy, right? You have to build on top of it to get to the point where you want to read a book, right? So if I don't have a winter coat and I'm cold, well, I don't want to read a book, but I want a winter coat. I need that. But then once I'm sitting outside and I'm bored and it's winter, or it's just sitting on the porch or whatever, and I'm like, okay, now I want something to do, so I need something to enjoy. And I think those are basically the same thing. So the time is something else everybody has to weather. It's part of our environment in some sense. And I think well, in a very real sense, time is part of our existence, right? And so we have to pass it somehow, right? And use it somehow, right? So I think communication is an important part of that.
yeah.
And I wanted to say one other thing though. You mentioned how your wife is a photographer, and I'm like, yeah, photography is also a great example of how creativity is not always obvious, right? Because
Yes.
you might say, like, on a traditional level, or like on a simple level, photography is taking pictures of things that already exist, but it's not just that, right? Now
Right.
we both know that there's way more that goes into making a photographic piece of art
Well, yeah, and I
than
like
just like I snapped a picture of the beautiful thing, right? That's not enough.
right. Like I watch her process. Like she takes hundreds of photos, and then she goes through them one by one until she finds
Hmm.
the one. And then she'll take that picture and she'll crop it and she'll adjust contrast and she'll adjust all the hue and all this other stuff until it is the picture that she has in her mind
Right.
is on that screen. And then she also has to keep in mind how that's going to translate onto she may print it on a canvas or she may print
Hmm.
it on paper, and that's gonna affect how it looks. So
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's so many
No, but
layers.
yeah, and that's, I guess that's the thing I've been trying to do more often in my own life and in process, to go back to process briefly, despite my trying to push away from it. It is related to inspiration, because what makes me more creative, honestly, than I otherwise could be at a given moment, is noticing the moment,
Yeah.
being aware of what's going on. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons, one of the ways you can, like when I say, like, oh, just make the universe a different universe in the case of some settings, or look at the fact that the photograph is itself a piece of art even before you edit it,
Yep.
is these kinds of things are kind of a perspective shift. And it's kind of take things apart in your mind, right? You can take apart, separate the fact that there's a beautiful image on a canvas that was printed, photo print or whatever, and look at how that thing got there.
Yeah.
And then when I'm talking fantasy, I was like, well, what if we changed one little thing about this process or outcome, right? And then applied it to some other particular craft. A great example of this is one thing that I actually had this thought for a long time, even before I worked in a loading dock at UPS, but is the idea of a superhero story it's maybe still even about the superheroes, but these superheroes they have like a huge support team, like vast factories and stuff that supply them with however their powers work. And I thought that would be really fun to have, like, oh yeah, no, these are like remote translation abilities that only one character is using the power, but there's like 50 hundreds of other 50s hundreds of other people that are working to make sure they have it. And I'm like, that alone is like, that changes the dynamic immensely. And so just combine the factory or the power plant with the superhero. And I've not written a story in that setting, but like I think it's really fun. And there's all sorts of other ways to tweak just what you expect to make things new. And that's why I really do think there are, it's the combination of there's nothing new under the sun, like I mentioned before, but also there's more under heaven and earth than that exists in your philosophy, than is dreamt of in your philosophy, from Hamlet.
And
It's both. They're both are true.
that's like I think about one of my favorite kinds of fun stories is kaiju stories. And
Hmm.
you can think of it as like you can think of like in terms of Pacific Rim, which is
Yeah.
just pretty much a fun, romp. But then you've got stories like Godzilla Minus One, which is a story about survivor's guilt.
Hmm.
Then you've got stories like the ones that Matthew Wayne Selznick has written for his kaiju series, which are about relationships. I mean,
Mm.
all of these from the core premise of a giant monster story. Uh,
Yeah.
so taking the core premise of a superhero story or a kaiju story or a time travel story, they're picking that apart, like you said,
Yeah.
and finding wherever your emotional core is, and whether that emotional core is telling something that just brings joy. It's just a fun
Mm.
afternoon, or it's a horror story, or it's a story that's you want to make people laugh, or you want to make them cry, or finding that emotional core and finding a way to take that story to that emotional place. That's the real challenge with writing for me is making that movement from point A to point.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that reminds me of this great film by Bong Joon-ho, who made the movie Parasite a few years ago that came out,
Yes.
won all these awards and stuff. But this is an older movie because it's actually, you said kaiju. It's not really a kaiju movie, but it is a monster movie. The monster's not as big as a kaiju. It's pretty big though. It's a moderately sized kaiju. Let's put it that way. But in The Host,
Good
you
movie.
think it's gonna be oh, have you seen it? Okay,
Yeah.
so it's like a disaster movie, but it also feels like it's about class solidarity among the people who are not that well off, because the family in the Host, which is kind of the main characters, they're not even that good at what they do. They're kind of messed up. And the movie's really silly at times because it's like the Shakespeare comedy thing or the great, where it's poking fun at little people,
Yeah.
but then it's also a drama because it's saying these people are, or actually, honestly, a tragedy. So it really is the dynamic between these two genres, comedy and tragedy, right? Where comedy is about in traditional storytelling, comedy is about the little guy and he's a goofball, and tragedy is about the powerful and how they fall apart. And this movie does both, which is fantastic. And I think structurally that's really, really interesting. And honestly, then when it comes to writing stuff, you can look at if you can break a movie that's about a giant fish monster with multiple legs down into that. Well, there's a lot more depth than you might think on the
Yes.
surface. Don't get caught up in the trappings, but also the trappings matter too. So there's this. It's just like you can you get in the engine, and you can work on the body of the vehicle. You can get
Yes.
down there and change how it works, and you can decorate it.
Yep. And I think even like as somebody who like consumes a vast amount of art and culture, because I want to infuse that into my storytelling, and I want to use that I want to use that as tools to make me a better storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
I end up finding things in other stories that I think other people miss. Like a good example, I watched the Green Lantern movie from 2011 recently, and I enjoyed it. And I
Okay.
know that's a controversial
Yeah, it's
opinion.
famously terrible. I've never seen it, but it's a famously bad movie. It's by
But
reputation.
but the reason I enjoyed it, I think, and I had to kind of tease it apart, like why did I enjoy this bad movie? The like the core of that story was about a boy who lost his dad, and he's
Mm,
trying to live up to his dad's this image that he has of his dad in his mind. He constantly they kept cutting back to that scene where his dad died in the
mm,
plane explosion, and he's just trying to cope for the rest of his life with that tragedy, and he uses humor, and he doesn't feel like he's got what it takes to do what he's supposed to do. So he's always running from responsibility, and he ends up getting the most responsibility that any human being can possibly have. And he even
mm-hmm.
tries to run from that, becoming a Green Lantern.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not a perfect movie. I would never.
No, but there's a strong core, is what you're saying, though.
Yeah,
There's stuff to like about it.
there's so much to like about it, but and again, it had a lot of potential to be that much better. But
Mm-hmm.
this isn't that podcast. I think that it's made me better at finding the core of a story and or the core of a piece of art, and trying to say, okay, I want to take that kind of story and I want to see what I can do with it. I want to take the story of a loss,
Mm-hmm.
and how someone can overcome that loss and become a hero. I want to tell that story, not as a Green Lantern
Yeah, of
story, obviously, because I don't have
course.
the IP, but um, would I love to write a Green Lantern story? Obviously, I would love to write a Green Lantern story. But but yeah, so that's the fun part about being a creator, is getting to be inspired by stuff like that and to do something better
Mm-hmm.
with that kind of story, even if it's something as quote unquote silly as a superhero story. And superhero
Right.
stories don't have to be silly.
Absolutely. I mean, they can be dark, they can be heartfelt, they can be all sorts of stuff. And I think what we've kind of explored here is that there's all sorts of options. And if you don't rush, I mean, honestly, that's my mantra lately. Is it's this Alistair Stewart said this of the pod, the Escape Pod, Pseudopod, etc. Various podcasts of short stories. I forget, what is it called again? Escape artists.
Yes.
Yeah, Alistair Stewart had this great moment where he told, I forget, he was on another person's podcast, but he said, "Don't rush," and it stuck with me because he said it so emphatically. And I mean, I think that's very reasonable, a very good piece of advice, right? Don't rush. Keep looking at what you can change or what could stay the same. Because if you change one thing, maybe that works better with the original concept, or maybe that works. Honestly, we haven't talked much about the book I'm working on, which makes sense because it won't be out for a while yet. But the Mirror Throne started with a concept where I misheard a song lyric, or
Okay.
I misinterpreted a song lyric. I don't know how much time we have left, but It was from the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. I'm a big heavy metal fan, so the Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Iron Maiden, which of course is itself a reference to Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem of the
Right.
same name. But and I'm not sure if I think this is one of the parts. I'm not sure if this is actually a lyric that Bruce Dickinson and the crew wrote for Iron Maiden, or if it was from Coleridge's poem. But there's this line where it's in the song. It's around his neck the dead bird is hung, referring to the mariner and the bird that he killed that caused the whole problem that he's going through. But I thought, what if we change bird to something else? Or, I mean, honestly, in hindsight, it's really I just changed the meaning of the word bird to something else that's sometimes called a bird. And I'm not going to spoil what that is. But I heard it weird a couple times, and I was like started imagining things different, and what would that mean? And for years, I had this concept of what this guy is being punished by having another character hung around his neck, basically, and sent out into the desert instead of thrown into the ocean. So it's not like, and that's how this book starts. Actually, this is how my work in progress currently begins. Is this kind of why this guy ended up? He's like a samurai, basically, like an Egyptian, but in an ancient Egypt meets feudal Japan, like I mentioned before. So it's like,
As you do.
it's a normal. Honestly, I think that's a combination of things that's pretty easy because they both have like a god king. You know, the emperor from feudal Japan, the pharaoh from ancient Egypt. You know, those are the kind of same. They both have kind of a class. They can have it. I just took the class system from feudal Japan and a little bit of Indian inspiration, honestly, as well, and mixed that in with we got like an Egyptian style geography in a way. Like there's river deltas and stuff like that, and there's a big desert. But other than that, it's not that hard. And instead of a shogun, I have these four because it's a landmass. There's like the shogun who would have been like the power behind the throne or the top general in Japan during the time of the when they're the feudal Japanese periods in a lot of cases is like instead of that I had four generals. So that to me, and it changes the dynamic intensely because now they're not the top dogs. The god king is now the top dog, the pharaoh. But like because there's four rival generals, but there was one for each cardinal direction. So there's one of the east, one of the west, one of the south, and one of the north. And I thought that was okay. So that divided up that power and provides an entirely different dynamic. And so like there's all this stuff going down, but that all sprang out of a few. And honestly, there have been other concepts that use that same mishearing or reinterpretation of that lyric from Iron Maiden.
Yep.
I've had other concepts with that same idea. And I eventually discarded them because I like this one better. I can't publish all of these. This was one of the later ones. This is one of the last ones that came up with. I'm like, finally, I'm getting somewhere with this. And so my hero is like this Conan-esque, Elric-esque kind of badass samurai warrior, huge jacked dude, probably. But he's but he's been dishonored and he's been sent to die. Being the story, that's the most important part. For committing a crime on the battlefield, basically, you might say. And like, and people will say like that doesn't feel at all like the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and they'd be right. Because that's the point. That's not the point. The point is inspiration can come from all sorts of places, and the further you draw it from, or the more different the place you draw it from, the more original you might be accused of being. Just a thought.
And it's inspiration as a springboard, like
Yep.
as a jumping off point, and who knows
Or
where
a
you can
seed.
go
Yeah.
from there. Well, that's awesome.
Actually, a seed is less of a. It's actually, I think the springboard is a better metaphor than a seed, actually, because a seed tends to grow the same kind of plant.
Right.
You might not know what kind of plant it's going to grow, but it's going to grow that plant. And a springboard can take you all sorts of different places. So,
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to checking that out. Tim, I want to thank you for your time. It's been great having you on. Tell people where we can find you.
You can
Of course,
find me.
I'll include
My
in the
works.
show notes.
Okay, I'm not going to rattle off all the social medias, but I'm on pretty much everywhere at this point: Facebook, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, even recently gone on Threads. And I'm posting pretty regularly on all of those. My page on Facebook is timniederriter.com. That's just my name.
Yep.
Just 3 letters and then however many letters my last name is. And then but my website is Tim, just my first, it's same thing, but it's my name spelled as the words it sounds like. So NEED writer, as in the guy who writes books.com. So timniederriter.com. Yeah. And that's my current website. My old stuff's defunct. I also have YouTube channels, but never mind those. They're in flux. And I'm working on starting a new podcast, but that's a story for another day.
Talk about that offline and see what that's all about. But thanks again for coming on, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
Yep.